just before they get going, let's see what you think. We're going to have 2 votes, if we may, on this subject of co-working. Can we have the first vote, please? Thank you very much. So co-working space is a temporary phenomenon. Do you agree or do you disagree? Please vote now. Okay, 74.2% disagree. Very interesting. We're hearing a lot of news that people are giving up their co-working space to go back to ordinary offices, but not people in this room. Let's have the next question. All office providers must integrate the lessons from co-working. The lessons about community, technology, etc., etc. Do you agree or disagree? Please vote now. Okay, 93% agree. You must integrate the lessons from co-working.
Where's that 7%?
Yeah.
Can they raise their hands?
You're trying to motivate your crowd. Yeah?
Hey, let's go now.
Yeah, come on, 7%. Yeah. All the landlords are there. Very good. Okay, same rules as before. Bill gets 4 minutes. Ryan gets 4 minutes. They get to ask each other some questions. You get to make points to them. They get to summarize, and then we take the vote. Bill, the floor is yours.
Great to be here in Hong Kong for ULI Asia Pacific, so thank you very much for organizing this. For most of you, this is a feedback from the Singapore conference last year to make it more fun. And I had the opportunity to meet Ryan for the first time on the phone a few weeks ago, and we've become good friends, but that stops now. And I'll tell you, if you take away his good looks, his height, his intelligence, everything that he has, he's got nothing. Right? So let's get right to it. The slides back here are just for just to have some background slides. There's some slides of what we're doing at Microsoft. But there is one slide in there that shows the different types of co-working space. Most people refer to a WeWork type of space, but even in Seattle, there are about 11 different groups that provide the co-working space. But here's my first torpedo. Developers are way too slow. Developers have not figured out what tenants like Microsoft or other high tech want or need. So they have a high viscosity for change. And that's torpedo number 1. Boom. Explode. So here's where we have to be careful as developers. Is that there is a shift. So we use WeWorks for some of our what we call the marketing spaces that doesn't really involve a lot of intellectual property issues. Otherwise, we need it very closed off. We need what we call our corp net. And that's something a third party cannot provide for us in terms of security. And you know what happens when things get hacked. Very, very bad things happen, especially if we're providing a lot of service for the consumers. And therefore, there's something to be careful about taking on a WeWork type or a co-working space type of a tenant, a larger tenant, who divides it up for others. Because it's a shift of risk. The risk is I, as representative of Microsoft, do not have to sign a multi-year lease and put our AAA credit on the balance sheet. Someone else is doing that, and that risk is reduced to a monthly payment in terms of membership. So let's think about that. That's like the gym membership. So the gym comes in town and says, we have a big gym, but we have these gyms all over the world. So if you sign up with us on a membership, you can go work out in Hong Kong and New York and other places, and people don't use that much. So what happens? The local yoga studio survives. The smaller neighborhood gym survives. And are we going to see that same pattern here or not? I think if you're a developer and you're bringing in these co-working tenants, you have to be a little bit careful. Because once you go through a recessionary period, where is that risk going to shift, right? And then I'll give that extra time to my good enemy, Ryan, here.
Wow.
But let me add something. This little debate war has been going on since 1800s. He went to Colgate, I went to Bucknell, right? Now, that's a Patriot League. So if you understand Patriot League, it was formed before the Ivy League. And we were asked to join the Ivy League. And we says, we're not going to play with those wimps. We're going to form our own, right? So this has been going on. He went to Colgate. I went to Bucknell. And I'm not sure which football team is better. But we debate it all the time.
Okay, I'm glad it's getting really personal now, Bill. This is very, very good. So, Bill, thank you very much. You've made your case, I think, and your case has primarily been that the development and investment community has not followed the needs of the worker, the opportunities of technology, and the requirements of new enterprises, so they better put up with the co-working phenomena. Ryan, the floor is yours. Over to you.
Thank you, Bill, and thanks for being so generous with the time. Since you did bring up the Bucknell-Colgate rivalry, I just want to say that I played tennis at Colgate, and I never once lost to Bucknell. So I hope to continue that today. And you know, I think
15 love, I would say.
Bill had some wonderful slides that he showed of some very impressive campuses that Microsoft is doing around the world. Before this debate, I tried to key my own slides into this, but as I think all of you know, Microsoft owns PowerPoint, and for some reason, they're not appearing it.
I don't know what happened.
I don't want to make any insinuations whether this is an overt effort of Microsoft to undermine my debate performance, but I'll leave that up to you to decide.
It was a simple text. It was a simple text. I don't know what happened.
All right. On to the main topic. Look, I think that it would be ridiculous for a developer to stand up here and say that we haven't needed a kick in the old pants, and that co-working and what's happened over the course of the last couple of years has done that. What I would argue is that we're only at the very beginning phases of what is co-working shared space. We're into, to use a U.S. baseball analogy, in the first or second innings, very much at the beginning phases of it. And we've seen, even in the course of the last couple of years, the evolution of how these spaces look, of how people use space, and I think there's still a long way to go. When you look at shared office spaces in Asia and most major cities, it still represents less than 5% of the total office space. So even if you double it and you triple it, and there's probably significant growth that's going to happen, it is still only going to be a component of the total office product that is out there. And the question really is, for developers, what can we learn from the co-shared space? What can we adapt? How can we utilize that for our own advantage, right? And I think that the kick in the pants has really been about how companies, how landlords relate to tenants and the services that they provide to tenants. If you look at some of the benefits of the space, it's about flexibility, it's about ease of use, it's flexibility of leases, the ability to put teams together quickly, the network, the community component of that, right, which I think is all very true. There's negatives, though, as well, too. Security, protection of IP. I think that companies moving into that space often lose their own identity, their own branding, which can have an impact on their organizational philosophy and who they are. So the question is, how as landlords can we take advantage of the good, get rid of the bad? Right, and I would say there's three things. The first is to admit that co-working in some form or format is here to stay. It's resonated with tenants, and providing some component of flexibility is important. And big buildings are going to need to respond to that in the future. Second, I think that developers are best positioned to make that happen. And the reason is that buildings, and this is especially true in Asia, and I think ultimately will happen in the US and Europe, but buildings themselves are going mixed use, right? The building of the future is not going to be a single-purpose office building or a single-purpose residential or retail. It's going to be perhaps in the basement where you used to have car parking that no longer exists because of driverless cars, last point of destination logistics, and then you've got retail, and then you've got co-working, then you have office, and maybe there's a hospitality or a living component to that, right? It is going to be mixed use in nature, and the entity that can unite all of those functions and features to provide the community that people really want is really the developer. And the technology that has been brought by co-working and others can be utilized to do that. The second component, and I only have 10 seconds, but the most important component that I would add is that I think that there is in the future a change in terms of how companies think about their office space. Today, it's a cost center. CFOs measure their occupancy by density, how many square meters per person or price per person. They're not measuring it by performance, by productivity. And I think that the change that's going to happen is that developers working with companies like Microsoft and others can demonstrate that certain spaces outperform other spaces, that certain things that you bring can outperform and create greater productivity. And as a developer, I'd love to charge Microsoft on a productivity basis rather than on a base rent basis.
It was overtime. It was overtime.
Yeah. So, Bill, I think Ryan served a couple of aces down there, and he said that the downsides of co-working, the loss of brand, security problems, intellectual property leakages, it's not for everyone, but the real estate community does need to adapt, and actually the developer and investor is the best person to lead the adaptation. He also made some very rude remarks about Microsoft, I thought, but you might want to respond to that. But Bill, do you have a question then for Ryan?
I do, but before I ask the question, sorry about your issue with PowerPoint. You can email the help desk, but I think it's user error. And just another note on the hacking thing. When people hack companies' computers, 90% of the time is they send you an email and you always have a clicker.
That's the old phishing thing that I keep getting. Is that what that is? I got to ignore those?
Don't click those. I do have a question for Ryan. Do you play table tennis? I'll take you on table tennis, right? not
Either right-handed or left-handed.
Here's the question. As a developer, right, and I've already made a statement that the developer has high viscosity for change. They're like honey or sludge moving through instead of flowing like water. You know, we're in Asia. We need to flow like water. But given your Asian experience and given your experience all over the world, because you do have extensive experience, what are the things that you're looking at for change in real estate to move along quicker to meet the needs of some of the tenants? And I ask that because I believe the technology is making the world change much, much quicker. And talk to us about a little bit of your reaction to it as a developer, as a major player in this Asian market, and what are the future goals for Tishman and you?
Well, I think there's a number of things, a number of areas where developers can play a role. I think the first thing is looking at the base building and what developers build, and looking at the product and asking, is that the product that tenants and companies like Microsoft want to be in? We're seeing a lot of companies move to much larger floor plates, right? So the old design of a center core building may not be the best layout for a lot of companies in terms of how they want to work. The ability of how you lay out your space around the center core can be somewhat challenging depending on the size of that floor plate, right? So there's a lot that needs to be done in looking at the base product that you do. You can look at the cores and how you activate the cores to bring services up to better service companies on a vertical basis that companies can look at, that developers can look at. I think that when you get into issues of like productivity, and there's been a lot of studies that focus on the human element in buildings, health, well-being, light pollution, sound pollution, ventilation, air quality, all of those things, those are really fundamentally in the base building of what the product is that you build. And you know, there's been a lot of studies that demonstrate sort of from the human condition what is the right environment or the better environment to work in. And I think developers have a responsibility in the future to address that right from the beginning of the product that they deliver.
Ryan, thank you very much. Now, do you have a question for Bill?
I do. You know, I noticed, Bill, that in most of the pictures that you had, you were showing campus-like environments, right? And more decentralized product. We heard from Professor Florida this morning about sort of the reurbanization trend, consolidation downtown, and so forth and so on. Can you speak to that from Microsoft's perspective as to why you prefer you're looking at the campus environment versus being more downtown city center?
It's an excellent question. We debate that all the time. I think in the Seattle ULI conference, John Schottler from Amazon and I got into this lunch debate about urban versus suburban. So let me explain it this way. Everybody talks about urbanity like it's the greatest thing, and it is. It has some good things, but there are also bad things that come along with it. Since the West Coast of the United States legalized marijuana, there's been people that take naps on public streets now in the urban environment.
They didn't take naps before?
They do, but now what's
They're a little bit
changed-
longer.
a little bit less, a little bit longer, and they're hungrier. So
That's actually good for the retail store. You need a store.
Yeah,
They're probably not online trying
Right.
to order their food either.
so you need the stores, right?
Yeah.
You can't order it online. So they're not asking for change; they're asking for $5, for instance, now, because they're hungrier. So what we've done as a strategy is that we've looked at, and if you talk to all of the high-tech real estate heads, in the back rooms, they'll say that I would love to have a suburban 100 acres and build our own thing. Okay. What we find is that we're trying to consolidate a lot of the workers together. Amazon has a great campus, but it's not really a campus. It's part of Seattle, a few buildings. There are also other people that are leasing buildings next to them. So you really can't call it a campus. So what we do is we have a suburban campus environment. We bring urbanity, the good things that we want to it, such as restaurants, such as convenience. We also try to densify a little bit, but we also don't like very, very tall buildings. Sorry, Ray. Hong Kong is a little bit different. It's because it becomes elevator-centric. And I think we experienced some of that yesterday when we're going to the 7th floor. So we don't do that.
Or not going to the 7th floor.
Yeah. And so we don't like that. We like the walkability of it. Now, the latest stats that we received, which is amazing, especially in the Seattle market in the United States, is the millennials just turned 35 last summer. So what happens when you turn 35? You're starting to think about having children, finding a mate, moving to where the good school districts are, and going out of the city where it's a little bit more controlled environment for the family. So we think we have a very good mousetrap for the future employees in a suburban environment.
So this is quite cynical, really.
Yeah. The mousetrap, you mean?
Well, the mouse ends up dying.
But they get paid. They get paid. Right?
Okay.
So that's
They
my,
pay to
They work pretty hard before they die, though.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
They get paid. I mean, they work hard. They're not like developers. Right? So,
Ouch.
So, Bill, have you any more to say, or is that it?
no, that's it.
Great. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are debating the most amazing topic, the rise of co-working space. Is it a Bane or is it a Boon? It's your turn to debate with Bill and Ryan. Those who want to come in, get your hands up fast. Lizette, keep the hand up, please, and the microphone will get to you. That's great. There it is. Who else is waiting to come in? Lizette, over to you.
Yeah, I have a question for Ryan. How does your approach, if you say we can help the occupier with improving productivity and all of that, most of that you measure once they're in. So how, as a developer, does that impact your business model, which in traditionally being kind of developing and going out again? Is it you turn into an investor or manager?
Well, so I would say that we do invest and manage real estate too. So we have pockets of product that we develop and we sell. We have pockets of product that we develop, own, and manage long term, right? But if you're a developer or an asset manager, if you're an owner of real estate, I think in general, you have to engage with your tenant in a very different way than we used to. You know, I think it used to be fairly simple. The relationship was, I gave you space, you give me money, and then that's about it, right? That's clearly changed, right? And I think it's, you know, we at Tishman Speyer now have launched our own sort of product, which we call Zoe, to engage our tenants. But it's not only us. If you were here yesterday and you saw the China presentation, Ascendus demonstrated something that they're engaged in called Bridge, which is very exciting. It's this process of really engaging with your tenant in a much more active way, understanding what are the services, what are the things that they need. I mean, the reality is that all of us spend an enormous amount of time at work, right? We spend many, many, many hours at work. And are there things that we can be doing as developers or asset managers or owners of real estate that make life easier for the people in the buildings? And I would argue that the answer is yes. Co-working has gone a step, but there's a lot more that can be done in the future.
So a deeper agenda about customization is at the heart of all of this, I guess. Who else is coming into this conversation with Bill and Ryan? Let's see hands up. Okay, we've got two down here. We'll take Richard at the front first, and then we'll take Karen behind him. Richard.
So I guess by definition, if space is being used more flexibly, then the certainty of income streams declines. And if you take that to the next step, you could see then values of the physical assets also declining because it's harder to put a high price on
You're assuming decline.
Uncertain income, right?
Okay.
So if you're using the space flexibly, you're not paying for it necessarily on long-term contracts. Do you worry about that in your business, Ryan? And how is Microsoft trying to take advantage of that when they're dealing with
Well,
that?
why don't you start, Bill? Does uncertainty automatically mean decline in the way that Richard suggests?
It's an interesting question. I don't think there's uncertainty. It's just, I think, again, I think the real estate industry, including the banks that provide loans to finance buildings, finance the developers, are also sluggish, right? So if you look at apartment buildings, let's take the example of the United States. They have 6-month leases, 1-year leases, but that's financed almost at the similar interest rates. And therefore, when the bank institutions or lending institutions require 10-year or 15-year lease from a AAA tenant like Microsoft, I don't know if the developers were debating that, right? Pushing back on it. So if the financing institutions provided a similar product of financing an office building the same way they do apartments, you're not really diminishing the value of it. And Tishman's got partners that they can negotiate internally for that and push that out. I think what Ryan was referring to is more of a mixed-use component of it, which is that renders the thinking of mixed-use financing in a building. You have apartments, shops, retail, and office in one package building, which makes it very interesting. And I think we're headed towards that way in the real estate industry. I think the whole work, live, play is starting to move towards each other. When I plan campuses, that's what we look at, and that's what the younger employees are looking at. There's no distinction of a 5 o'clock we go home. They feel like they're constantly working, constantly playing, and they're constantly living.
And you internalize all of that in your business model for the real estate part.
That's correct.
Great. Ryan, we've got to be quick now, guys, because we've got another question waiting.
Yeah, sure. I would say that obviously as an investor and owner, you always want long-term certainty in terms of your income stream and your cash stream. And for a certain portion of the product, we were likely to continue to have that, right? We see the sort of flexible space of co-working being a component of a building, not the entire thing. But I think that the next question for real estate is really space efficiency and usability, right? Anytime a space is empty, it's not producing anything for you, right? And I think that there's a lot that can be done in the future as people think about this, of how space can be used, not just 10 hours during the daylight time, but extending the life cycle of space by having flexibility of that use, right? And I think that's where a lot of thinking has to go in the future. And it's going to also impact how tenants think about space, right? So every tenant has conference rooms, but the reality is that if they were to analyze how much they actually use their conference room spaces in their own setting, it's probably 30-40%, right? Is there an avenue to cut that back, put that in the base building somewhere, and the developer to charge perhaps more for that, but to take it out of the tenant and utilize space better? Probably. And I think there's a bunch of things of that nature that will evolve over a period of time.
Great, thank you very much. Quick question from Karen, quick responses.
Do any of you have a wellness index, and how do you measure productivity?
Okay, wellness and productivity, Bill.
Wellness is going to be the key thing, right? And the more information that you have about how an employee works or how efficient the space is, how much light there is, the water, the air quality, you can directly measure the wellness aspect of it. And there are certifications of it. I don't know if it's similar to the LEED component of it. We're studying through that now. Some of the things in the past, what LEED was doing was more of a label than an actual, in our opinion as a company. So we're doing 18 new buildings. We'll probably just get one LEED to say that we can do it and spend the soft cost money on things that really matter to employees. Sorry for those people that make money certifying.
Are there any certifiers here in the room? Maybe they were part of the 7% that voted.
They're Ryan's friends. But wellness is going to be a very big thing. Now, measuring the productivity aspect of it is very tricky. So you can measure the number of meetings. For instance, when we have our own team-based space that we do on our campus, the number of emails among the team members to themselves dropped by 42%, right, versus individual offices. The amount of meetings that they have, one-on-one meetings with their team members, dropped by 38%. The amount of meetings that they have with people outside of their immediate teams increased by 22%. So you can project that that's going to have some productivity increases. But whether or not that really makes money or not for the company is a different thing, which is going to be the challenge of what Ryan needs to figure out if he's going to if he's going to measure the productivity of a tenant and tie that to a rent or lease rate scenario.
So it sounds like done.
Yeah, but the usage of space also drops. As Ryan says, we do know what conference rooms are being used and not used. In a co-working team-based space, it drops quite a bit because they're just talking to each other.
Okay, it sounds like it's advantage Bill
Of course.
in the tennis match. So what are you going to do? What's your reply, Ryan?
I mean, I think that I agree with very much a lot of what Bill had mentioned. You know, Microsoft is on the forefront of obviously figuring out these issues of wellness for your employees and the rest of it. I can say as a developer, you know, in China, for instance, we focus a lot on air quality, right? So we can control a lot of the base building activity of what goes in, the inputs and the outputs out of the base building. And you know, we measure air quality, indoor air quality in all of our buildings in China, and that resonates in a market where the outdoor air quality can be somewhat challenging. And you know, then HR departments can measure things of sick days by their employees. And we have tenants that, you know, we can demonstrate that has changed over a period of time and being in some of our assets, right? So I think wellness, health, alongside sustainability are really core principles that all developers have to think about. And I think a lot of this will happen in collaborations with technology companies and the types of things that they're doing within their own space that can be rolled out in a much more broad way.
Great, thank you very much. We're back to juice, ladies and gentlemen. Gents, you've got 1 minute to summarize your arguments, and Ryan, I'm going to invite you to go first.
Well, first I should start with a confession, which is I actually didn't have any slides. I was very lazy and didn't produce anything. So Microsoft, you're off the hook. It wasn't a malpractice. Look, I think that the question is not Bane or Boon in terms of co-working. We believe it's here to stay in some form and format. It is a component of the office market. The real question is, how do landlords evolve and adapt, and what lessons can we take from the technology that they've brought into the space so that we can better serve our tenants? And I do believe that going forward, given the technology that exists in buildings, I mean, we monitor everything from base building systems to elevator usage to air quality to so forth and so on, there will be, in the future, an ability to monitor productivity. And at the end of the day, for a CFO for a business, that should be your main concern. Not space per person, but how productive is your employee in that building.
Thank you very much indeed. Let's give Ryan first a round of applause. Billy's got it back to advantage Ryan now, so your chance to summarize, you have 1 minute.
Ryan came clean, so he represents the most endangered species we have on the planet, which is the honest man, right? Now, so I want to push the developers. I think that's my role here today, and it's really a CapEx OpEx issue, and it's a great ULI story. So last year I met through the introduction of some folks here, Alto, who's our sponsors for this event, and they do fascinating lighting. Like right now, there's a lot of glared lighting to me, and my stress level's up, not because of Ryan, but for the lighting. They develop these lights that don't have any glare. So I visited the factory, we looked at it, we brought some to Microsoft, we're testing it very heavily. We've also requested to put 12 different sensors in it. They responded in 6 months and put it in. Now I've also requested to put in wires that are category 6E, which is power over Ethernet. And if they can do that, it eliminates about 1 month of my electric contractor work. So we can put that into about 9 million square feet in Microsoft. It has more CapEx to it, right? So here's a question, and then I'll get into the whole co-working thing. The CapEx is measured by return on investment, which is a different notion for a developer than for some big tenant where we own our own buildings, because our return on investment is based on productivity, right? And so the trick is, if Ryan can figure out the productivity component to the lease, then I think the interests are aligned. But so far, the developers are looking at CapEx investment, minimize that, and increase the revenue. And that thought needs to start to shift, right? It starts to become more of a partnership with the tenants. Now, regarding the co-working space, yes, sir, in the future, is that be careful, right? Because if you look at the co-working tenants that you have in the building, essentially from accounting basis and from a P&L standpoint, they've just signed on to a long-term liability with short-term contract revenue. Like, what happens in a downturn? Are they going to come back to you and renegotiate? Or are they just going to go belly up? So you are essentially taking on that risk. For us, when we go through a co-working space as a major tenant, master tenant, we're shifting our risks. It works beautifully for us for certain types of workers in that space. So that would be the resulting. I think it would be a Bane.
Great. Thank you very much indeed. Round of applause for Bill, please. Ladies and gentlemen, what do you think? The rise of co-working, is it a boon, a great thing, or is it a bane, a pain? Please vote now. Ooh, it's very, very, very close. There are hanging chads here in Hong Kong.
Where's that 7% when you need it?
But look where it started.
Yeah, amazing.
Where's that 7% when you need it?
Yeah. But the 7% has really grown to 44.8%. Ladies and gentlemen, Bill and Ryan have done a fantastic job. Please join me in thanking them. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.